were exactly 100 days ago at this hour, Donald Trump took the oath of office as the 47th President of the United States of America. And what a turbulent, convention-smashing 100 days it's been as the president moves at a frenetic pace to transform the United States and its role in the world. There have been obvious successes like illegal border crossings plunging to the lowest level in decades, and some things not so successful, like trillions of dollars lost in the markets. It's been the most chaotic first 100 days in modern presidential history, from taking a sledgehammer to the federal government to targeting political opponents and launching a global trade war. The chaos of the last 100 days is a feature, not a bug. It's always been an intrinsic part of Donald Trump's style, and unlike in his first term, the president is now surrounded by people who want the chaos. For millions of his hardcore supporters, this is what they voted for in November. But nearly 6 months after Election Day, a flurry of new polls show the president has lost the middle. Less than a third of independents approve of the Trump presidency so far. And a new CNN poll out this morning reveals that 41% say they're afraid about the rest of the president's term. Another 1,362 days. I want to start with CNN's Jeff Zeleny, who is in Warren, Michigan. That is where the president is heading later today for a rally. Macomb County, it is probably the most famous political county in the country. Jeff.
There's no doubt it is, Dana, and that is why President Trump is coming here to Macomb County, Michigan. It tells a story not only of our changing American politics, but how Donald Trump arose to the White House and returned again. He won Macomb County, just north of Detroit, by 14 points. And of course, that helped seal his statewide win in Michigan. However, as he takes a victory lap today, there's deep concern on the economy. There's deep concern over the on-again, off-again tariff policy, including the White House again today, the president signing a new executive order, he will be, to ease auto tariffs once again. That is good news for some auto manufacturers here, Dana, but just gives you a sense of the chaotic nature, as you talked about, of the first 100 days. But the president coming here for a reason, to make the point that he is invested in remaking American manufacturing. But what he also needs to do, as the White House well knows, is to sell his economic agenda. This is actually the first time he's visiting a battleground state for a rally like this. He's spent much more time in the White House or at Mar-a-Lago, but he's back on the road and talking to voters here and Republicans. They believe he has some selling left to do. Dana?
Jeff, thank you so much for that report. And today we're going to take a step back to look at how President Trump's first 100 days have transformed America and what comes next. Here's just some of what happened so far. On day one, President Trump pardoned more than 1,000 January 6 rioters. He's cut at least 121,000 people from the federal workforce, used his famous Sharpie to sign more than 200 executive orders and proclamations, shuttered USAID, slashed the Education Department and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, declared a national emergency on the southern border, deported scores of alleged gang members to a prison in El Salvador, moved to punish perceived political enemies inside and outside the government, removed countless DEI initiatives, withdrew from the World Health Organization and Paris Climate Accord, slashed funding for scientific research at the NIH and top universities, took over the Kennedy Center, threatened to withhold funding from universities, signed an order proclaiming only two sexes and banning transgender women from female sports, criticized Ukraine's president in the Oval Office, and held high-level talks with Russia. And there are those sweeping tariffs, of course. This is actually not even close to comprehensive. I'm joined now by a terrific group of reporters on this 100th day of Trump 2.0. CNN's David Chalian, CNN's Jamie Gangel, Laura Barone-Lopez of the PBS NewsHour, and CNN's Phil Mattingly.
So you're saying he's been quiet and sleeping on the job.
You're going to catch your breath.
Going to go around the horn. One sentence to describe the last 100 days.
Well, as you just encapsulated, I would say my sentence is, in these first 100 days, he's taken significant steps to upend the domestic economy and the global order, and now begs the question to voters, if this is the change, they still believe in, to borrow a phrase from political history. And at the moment, voters seem to have questions about that.
That's more than one sentence. It's the economy, stupid, to quote James Carville. Look, all of those things that you talked about and more, absolutely. But I think right now, what we're looking at is he promised the best economy, not to steal Phil Mattingly's subject, and we're not there.
I'm going to quote the Reagan-appointed judge from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, Harvey Wilkinson, because I think that it encapsulates the confrontation that the courts are potentially headed for with the administration. I mean, Harvey Wilkinson, again, a Reagan-appointed judge, said it takes no small amount of imagination to understand that this is a path of perfect lawlessness, one that the courts cannot condone when talking about this administration's actions on deportations.
Joke's on Jamie. I can talk about economics for the better part of 6 or 7
We
hours
only got a sentence. We've got a
nonstop.
lot more to talk about.
My sentence is, you break it, you own it. And I'm not saying that to be snarky or even critical on some level, but when it comes to the economy, the Trump administration inherited a solid, stable economy from the Biden administration. There are plenty of concerns on prices, but that's what they brought in terms of the underlying data points. The euphoria that was described by chief executive officers at Davos at the start of the administration, the speed with which that has completely fallen off a cliff, not just for the business community, but for everyday consumers, consumer confidence at its lowest point since the pandemic. It's a mess right now, based on what people think is coming, based on what the president delivering on what he said he was going to do.
And on that very note, we have a new round of numbers from our latest poll on the economy. And this is very telling. And David, I want you to weigh in on this. Trump's policies have improved economic conditions, 27%. Worsened economic conditions, 59%. 59%. So almost 6 in 10 Americans. And this is not just about the economy that is happening. It is about the economy that is happening because of Trump's policies from the perspective of these voters.
Yeah, and by the way, that 59% number just last month in March was 51%. We don't see that kind of movement usually in American politics like that in 1 month time, moving 8 points against the president there. So now, as you noted, it's 6 in 10. That is not a good number for the president. Now, inside the White House, they will tell you this is precisely that short-term pain that we anticipated, that we knew these policies would sort of inject into the system, but that there will be a long-term gain. How long will Americans give him the benefit of the doubt? Obviously, his supporters will hang in there longer than independents will, as we're already seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the Treasury Secretary go out first thing this morning and talk about the tariffs only being one part of the larger economic picture, and talking about the fact that there are other things to come. I mean, we'll see. And what you're seeing on the screen, by the way, Jamie, these are CNN headlines. And it could go on for days, just to sort of remind people some of the examples. And as we keep talking, of all of the tsunami of news that we have gotten because of the just frenetic nature of 100 days.
So whether we're talking about the economy or immigration or federal workers, there's been a lot of whiplash. There's been chaos, there's been confusion, but there's policy whiplash. It leads to uncertainty. And the Treasury Secretary can come out and promise, and the White House can come out and promise, but you listen to prominent CEOs, Wall Street, business leaders, no one knows what Donald Trump will do next. 2.0 is very different from 1.0. To quote, I think it was the Wall Street Journal editorial board, they said at 100 days, Trump 2.0 is in trouble. So the White House can say this is short-term pain, but certainly consumers don't see it and the business community doesn't.
Well, and speaking of consumers and the business community, there was a pretty important development that just happened. It continues to develop, but we saw a big shift right before we came on air. And this has to do with Amazon and President Trump and Jeff Bezos. What happened?
Yeah, speaking of needing 7 hours to explain something. So Punchbowl News, our great friends and colleagues over at Punchbowl News broke the story this morning that one of the offshoot websites of Amazon was going to post the price differential based on tariffs on the website so consumers would see it. You've actually seen companies do this in the past with inflation prices, those things like that. Trump, according to our colleague Elena Treen, great reporting, picked up the phone and called Bezos, who he's gotten increasingly close with over the course of the last several months, was very upset about what happened. Now Amazon is saying that is not under consideration. It will not be implemented. They backed off. And I think there's a bigger picture here that's important to note. Trump has a level of authority and influence over the business community that he never had before now. The problem in this specific case is Amazon is one of hundreds of thousands of companies that are trying to grapple with, okay, do we eat these prices? Do we pass them on to consumers? How do we kind of deal with this going forward? And it would become a game of whack-a-mole to be able to knock out every single company and jawbone them away from doing that. It's just kind of getting to the uncertainty idea right now. The underlying economy is good. The numbers are still good. Inflation is good, wages are good, jobs are good. What everybody's looking forward to is what Amazon was trying to figure out when they were considering this proposal for one of their offshoot websites, which is things are about to potentially get really bad. And just the perception of that in a consumer-driven economy can lead to those things actually happening, whether they're going to or not.
And what I think there's a difference between a mom and pop shop in Minnesota putting on their website the differential price and a multi-billionaire company that probably can afford to take the hit on tariffs to some extent without passing it on to the consumer. And it was that the politics of that gave the White House and Trump in that phone call to Bezos, I'm sure, a bit of a card to play.
Even if Amazon has backed off, there are a lot of those small businesses across the country that are making it very clear that they're saying to their the people that buy their products, look, this stroller that you're about to buy, the cost of it is going to change from this much to this much if this goes into effect. I mean, you see it all the time, them posting on social media, making very transparent and clear the impact on their small business. So even if the massive retailers don't say it, the voters are seeing it, which is why they're so scared about the tariff.
Well, on that note, let's look at another new figure. We mentioned at the beginning of the show, but I think it's important to bring it back up. Best describes feelings for the rest of Trump's term. 41% say that they are afraid.
Right. So, look, Donald Trump, does he care what people think about this? He cares about these poll numbers, what he often calls his ratings. But he has not reacted to the market going down the same way he did in 1.0. My question is, will these poll numbers change any of the policy directions that he's going in? Because there is no question Americans are afraid of what's to come. I was talking to some business people out in the world, sort of mid-sized businesses, and they said, look, in 3 weeks, 6 weeks, we could be back to COVID shortages because of supply chain. We don't know whether that's going to happen yet, but they're worried. And not just because of China, because of tariffs all over the world.
Matt Egan is here to talk about this. All right, Matt, what are you seeing?
Well, John, it's a relatively quiet 100th day after really months of extreme turbulence in financial markets, and I would argue a surprisingly weak first 100 days when you consider how excited Wall Street was about Trump 2.0. I mean, you and I were on set talking after the election when we saw the market go straight up. And I think in hindsight, investors were underestimating all of the chaos and, of course, all of the tariffs. Look at this. So since the president took office, the S&P 500 is down 8%. That is a big loss. This is investors giving the Trump agenda 2 thumbs down. And when you look back at how this stacks up in recent history, we saw an 8% move also for under Biden, but that was 8% up. Similarly, under Obama, both of his terms, again, through 100 days, the market was up around 7 or 8%. The only one that really compares is George W. Bush, when the market was down significantly in 2001. Of course, that was during the bursting of the dot-com bubble. So big losses there. When you really zoom out, you have to go back a half century for any comparison. This is the worst start, or on track, depending on how things close today, on track to be the worst start since 1974 under Ford, after Nixon had resigned during the Great Stagflation. One other stat to leave you with: this is how much the market has lost since Trump took office. $4 trillion. And this was actually much bigger number until markets started to rebound a little bit as the president walked back some of his tariffs.
That T stands for trillion.
Today marks 100 days since President Trump took office. And this week in the Situation Room, we're taking a deep dive on 5 key topics and where they stand 100 days in. Today, we're taking a look at the president's foreign policy agenda. His radical reimagining of American relations has come at a dizzying pace. He has threatened to make Canada the 51st state, has renamed the Gulf of Mexico, and he's launched a full-scale trade war with China. All of this as the war in Ukraine he promised to end in day one drags on, and as the lasting peace he vowed to bring to Gaza remains elusive. CNN's Brian Todd is back at the Magic Wall today to walk us through where things stand on the world stage. All right, so Brian, let's start with China. Escalating trade war and rising tensions over Taiwan. Where do things stand in the region?
Pamela, things still very tense between the U.S. and China in that region, primarily because of this number. 145%. That's the percentage of tariffs that the president has slapped on Chinese exports of goods to the United States, a major cause of tension between the U.S. and China. The latest reporting is that the Chinese government is denying President Trump's claims that Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently called President Trump to talk about the tariffs. The Chinese say that call did not happen. The president has said that this number is going to come way down in negotiations with China when they start, and he's promised to be nice in those negotiations, but we have to see how those play out, of course. This all comes as tensions have been clearly ramping up over Taiwan. Just this month, the Chinese ramped up these military drills around Taiwan. These were live fire military drills. They actually also practiced a blockade of Taiwan, this causing major tension with the United States. In recent years, Pamela, the Chinese have ramped up these military drills around Taiwan, ostensibly preparing for a possible invasion, creating lots of tension with Washington. Pamela.
All right. And also, candidate Trump had said he'd end the war in Ukraine before even taking office. He said it would be day one. That's something our reporting indicates he has conceded privately. It's been harder than he thought.
It's been harder than he thought, Pamela, and he has voiced open frustration at various points along the war, along these negotiations about ending the Ukraine war. The latest came yesterday when the president actually, this was last week, the president told Time magazine, quote, Crimea will stay with Russia. Well, that didn't sit well with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has not conceded that Crimea is going to stay with Russia. That is a real point of contention. We can say, though, that the president and Volodymyr Zelensky had a good and productive meeting, this reported by both sides, a good and productive meeting at the Vatican over the weekend on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral, where they made some progress in these negotiations. And it also comes as the president has openly expressed frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin for continuing to fire missiles at the time that they're trying to negotiate a peace deal in Ukraine. And this is a far cry, this relationship with Zelensky improving, a far cry from what we saw in February when the two of them had a very contentious and open argument in the Oval Office over the war in Ukraine, Pamela.
Well, we also, you talked about the trade war with China. The president's trade war has also upended relations with our neighbors to the north and the south. How have Canada and Mexico responded?
Our best friends, right? We get along with them famously. Well, not recently, Pamela. The president, even yesterday, kind of ramping up the tension a little bit. He posted a tweet on Truth Social saying, again, alluding to the possibility of Canada becoming the 51st state. This was a tweet when he wished the people of Canada good luck in their parliamentary elections, but again, kind of just, jabbing them a little bit, again, with talk of the Canadians becoming the 51st state. This, of course, comes after the president floated the idea of calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. That rankled people on the Mexican side and many Americans as well. And you've got the tariff issue again. As we talked about with China, the U.S. imposing 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for steel, aluminum, autos, auto parts, and goods that were not covered in that U.S. Canada-Mexico agreement. So again, very contentious relations of late with our neighbors to the north and south, Pamela.
All right, let's turn to another war that Trump promised to end, Israel's war on Hamas and Gaza. Where do things stand on that front?
Well, we can tell you, Pamela, that the president can count to 2 victories, just on his side since he's taken office. The freeing of 2 Israeli-American hostages, Sagi Dekelhan freed in mid-February, Keith Siegel freed on February 1st. That happened during Donald Trump's first 100 days, but no major breakthrough on a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. As both sides continue the negotiations, also Israel expanding its operations in Gaza last month, so far from resolved. And, it didn't necessarily help matters that in February the president posted this video. This is an AI-generated fake video that the president posted on Truth Social in February, kind of imagining what life would be like under a U.S. takeover of Gaza. Kind of a ridiculous video showing Elon Musk eating hummus by the sea, other images of, people frolicking, golden statues of Donald Trump. The Palestinians have not taken well to the idea of a U.S. takeover of Gaza. They have rejected it soundly, Pamela.
Also in the Middle East, we've seen an ongoing U.S. military operation targeting Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and talks over the future of Iran's nuclear program. What do we know there?
Well, talks have actually been fairly productive in recent days, Pamela. That's another feather in the president's cap, moving things along after he scuttled the previous deal with Iran back in 2018. He's revived the talks. They have made progress in recent days, but this also comes as the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and the U.S. forces in the Gulf of Aden have engaged in back and forth. The U.S. pounding the Houthis in recent days, killing several Houthi leaders and pounding their targets. But we can also report, our national security team reporting that in recent days, the Houthis have destroyed at least 7 U.S. Reaper drones, which showing their ability to kind of counterattack the Americans. That has prevented the U.S. from ramping up their campaign against the Houthis even more by possibly targeting Houthi leaders. That has delayed that. So the Houthis firing back at the U.S., kind of putting problems with the U.S. in their military planning against the Houthis. So that campaign kind of drags on, Pamela.
All right, Brian Todd, thank you so much. Wolf.
Excellent analysis from Brian. I want to get some more analysis right now. I want to bring in Leon Panetta. He served as Defense Secretary and CIA Director under President Obama. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. 100 days now into President Trump's second term. What's your overall assessment of his foreign policy record, at least so far?
Well, there's a great deal of cause for concern because the foreign policy that this country's had for 80 years under both Democrat and Republican presidents, in which the United States has exercised strong world leadership, has built strong alliances, has been a strong world leader in terms of our values of democracy. That foreign policy has been turned on its head. We're basically operating alone. We've walked away from our allies and from our alliances. We've walked away from some of the fundamental values that have always marked the United States' position in the world in terms of support for freedom, support for democracy. Our adversaries, obviously, we are still trying to struggle to determine just exactly what our strategy is with our adversaries, particularly with Russia and particularly in Ukraine. And so the bottom line here is that there's a great deal of chaos, a great deal of turmoil, and there isn't much clarity with regards to the overall strategy for the United States in dealing with a very dangerous world.
And Mr. Secretary, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, President Trump, has turned a bit more critical of Vladimir Putin in recent weeks. He even acknowledged that Putin might not be interested in peace and is simply stringing him along. Do you think Trump's views on Putin, and Russia for that matter, are genuinely shifting right now?
I think for the last 100 days, that the administration has badly misjudged, not only dealing with Putin, but dealing with Ukraine and dealing with our allies. With regards to Putin, the reality is that the president thought he could just simply say pretty please to Putin. And pretty please never works with Mr. Putin. You have to operate with Putin from strength. You've got to make very clear to Putin that he will not succeed in Ukraine. and put pressure on Putin if you expect Putin to in any way do what is necessary here in order to achieve peace. I think he's also misjudged Ukraine. He basically said Ukraine did not have any cards. The reality is Ukraine has the most important cards of all, which is their country, and the fact that they are willing to fight and die for their country. Those are pretty good cards to have.
They certainly
And lastly,
are.
I think we touched our allies as well. Our allies have come to the rescue of dealing with Ukraine. Frankly, the United States ought to be part of that effort.
Another sensitive issue, Canada, and who would have ever thought that U.S.-Canadian relations could be in trouble? The Liberal Party just won federal elections yesterday in Canada. It's a stunning turnaround. Many see that election as a referendum on Trump. How is Trump shaking up the political landscape all across the world, including with our closest friends and allies?
Well, again, look, this is a dangerous world, Wolf. We're dealing with an aggressive Russia. We're dealing with China. We're dealing with Iran. We're dealing with North Korea. We're dealing with terrorism. That's a lot to focus on. And to have the president, rather than focusing on all of those danger points, raise issues about taking over Canada, taking over Greenland, taking over the Panama Canal, those are diverting issues that, in many ways undermine the credibility of the United States and the rest of the world. If the United States is taking time out in order to go after Canada and go after Greenland, then I think the rest of the world looks at that. And very frankly, the United States is losing its credibility in the world in terms of really dealing with the danger points that are out there.
Leon Panetta, excellent analysis. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Let's discuss this and more with Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He's the author of an important new book entitled Turnaround, America's Revival. Senator, thanks very much for coming in. Thanks very much for writing this excellent new book.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
I hope it's helpful in the national conversation.
It's going to be very helpful. I want to talk about it, but let's talk about some of the issues that are ongoing right now. You're watching all of this unfold. President Trump's approval rating for his first 100 days, as you've seen in all these polls, not just the CNN poll, is the lowest of any president in at least 70 years. 70 years since modern polling actually began. Does he need to rethink seriously the way he's approaching his second term, given the fact his numbers are going down, down, down on the economy, national security, other critical issues?
Yeah, he's been very focused on the long-term results, trying to be able to open up trade agreements around the world, and he put tariffs, obviously, globally around the world and said, I want everyone to come to the table and to be able to negotiate. This is a high-risk, high-reward strategy that he's put in place.
Is he doing the right thing with these tariffs?
Well, he's starting to negotiate. That's very helpful on this. And I think this is going to be one of those things history is going to write, not actually the newspaper today is going to write.
But a lot of agricultural farmers in your state, in Oklahoma, are suffering right now as a result of what President Trump is doing.
No, the ag folks are not suffering in my state right now because of that. They're suffering because of the high inflation that they've experienced the last several years on it. Every single product has gone up significantly, whether it be the diesel in their tractors, the tractor itself, all the equipment, all the inputs. Fertilizer has gone just skyrocketed in the last 4 years. They're actually hopeful. When I talked to the ag folks in the last 2 weeks as I was traveling around the state, around that Easter gap that we had, the ag folks are very hopeful to say we want to open up new markets that we've not been able to get access to.
But Oklahoma's agricultural exports to various countries have really gone down, haven't they?
They've not had new markets, and that's been their challenge under the Biden administration.
But
they
forget about the new markets. What about the existing markets, like China, for example?
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the issues that President Trump had actually in his first administration, making a deal with China to be able to say you got to buy more soybeans, you got to do this. China didn't fulfill that, but there's a lot of it. There is. Australia doesn't take our beef, for instance. We have issues with Argentina. We have the UK doesn't want to take our chicken. They say it has chlorinated chicken on it. They don't want to be able to take that, even if it's unchlorinated chicken for cleansing on it. So all these different trade barriers that we have around the world, the ag folks are very specific. Open those up. We want to be able to trade more around the world. The goal of this should be have a tariff fight where we bring everyone to the table, have negotiations, open up more markets, then have low tariffs. I do not want to see high tariffs at the end of this. I want to see low tariffs and trade barriers go down.
I want to get reaction to all of today's developments. We're joined now by Louisiana's Republican Senator John Kennedy. Senator, thanks so much for joining us 100 days into President Trump's term Just 41% approve of the job he's doing in our new CNN poll, and just 37% approve of Republicans leading Congress. Are those serious warning signs for your party?
I think, Wolf, that the American people have been unhappy at least for 10 years. That's why President Trump was elected the first time. They weren't unhappy, or they weren't happy rather under President Biden, in part because of inflation, and their unhappiness continues. We'll see what happens over the next year. In terms of the president's first 100 days, it's hard to find the honey and the rock and the water and the stone in 100 days. But having said that, I think President Trump's done some things right in his first 100 days. He's secured the border. He's been very aggressive in abolishing racial quotas. He's deregulating the economy, getting rid of rules and regulations. He's changed the national conversation about the federal budget. He and Mr. Musk. Under President Biden, the conversation or the question was, who needs to pay more in taxes? Now, thanks to Trump and Musk, I think the question in Washington and elsewhere is what the hell happened to the money? The final point I would make, you may find a little strange, but it has to do with Europe. President Trump, as we all know, exists loudly. And his loud existence has awakened Europe with respect to its economy and its national defense, national security.
President Trump marks the first 100 days of his second term, and Democratic voters aren't just frustrated with him, they are also frustrated with their own party. The approval rating for Democratic leaders in Congress is just 38%, amid growing frustration from voters who say they aren't doing enough to disrupt Trump's agenda.
And joining us now, Pamela, CNN senior political commentator Van Jones, who served with President Obama. Van, thanks for joining us. What message do these low approval numbers send to the Democratic Party?
That people feel like they're sitting on a white-hot stove of fear and concern and anxiety because of the attacks on the Constitution, the rule of law. It's not just, look, everybody's freaked out about the economic uncertainty, the tariffs. Everybody's 401ks are becoming 401qs and 401zs. So everybody's concerned about the economic piece. But I think that for Democrats, we really believe in the Constitution. We believe in the rule of law. We believe that everybody should obey the law, including the President of the United States. And to see the Supreme Court say, listen, bring this human being back to the United States, give him his fair treatment, and the president to basically just laugh it up in the Oval Office and say, I'm not doing it, have a dictator say, we're not doing it, and just go on like nothing's happening. I think people would want to see, let's see senators do a Cory Booker every day. Cory Booker's stood on his feet for 25 hours. I think we got 40 more senators. Shut the thing down and give the American people a chance to have a real conversation about, do we want to have a constitution or not? I think that's where the base is at. And I think that the numbers are going to go lower before they go higher. Governor Pritzker said, look, it's time for disruption. I think Cory Booker set a good example of how you can peacefully and nonviolently stand for something and get the world's attention. We got 40 more senators that should be doing the same thing.
It wasn't just Democrats who scored low in our polling. We should know Republicans did as well. Democrats, as you're well aware, they're in the minority. What other opportunities do you think exist for your party? You mentioned, giving speeches on the floor like Cory Booker. What else?
Well, listen, obviously the normal toolkit is limited because we're in the minority in both parties. But I do think that the pain of ordinary people, everyday people, could be lifted up. You could imagine a situation where some of these people who've had their, the rug pulled out from under them, these grants. I don't mean grants going to fancy colleges. I mean grants going to neighborhoods where people have been using dollars from the federal government to stop gun violence. Those grants have gone away. Trump's talked about putting the military on the streets of America to deal with crime. Crime was going down in places like Philadelphia because of grants that have now been taken away. So I think you got to put a human face on the people who have the rug pulled out from under them, people who are not going to be able to pay for their medicines because they've changed some of those rules. And by the way, what sense does it make to have a country where we've had so many DOGE cuts that we now cannot properly evaluate milk? We're giving milk to children, and we don't have milk inspectors. I mean, some of this stuff is so absurd. I think there needs to be better coordination. Every day there should be putting forward, here's another set of people who've been hurt. Here's another set of people. Here's another set of disabled children. Here's another set of veterans. Here's another set. And you just continue to build the drumbeat. But listen, the impatience of the base is not going to go away until the midterms. Until the Democrats prove that we can win elections, that we can get one of these chambers back, probably the House, I think people are going to be upset because we played by the rules under Obama and Biden, and to see the rule book be burned in the trash can, I think is very hard for people.
Van Jones, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Van.
Thank you.